The evolution of football positions, a complete history. Every position on a football pitch was invented by a problem. Not one of them was designed. The sweeper, the winger, the false nine, the holding midfielder, the inverted fullback, each was born in a moment of crisis, when a coach looked at the game and realized the old shape was losing. What we treat as the natural map of the pitch is really a century of desperate solutions, stacked on top of each other. This is the story of how those solutions were found, one problem at a time. In the beginning, there was chaos, and the chaos had a name. It was called dribbling. In the earliest organized football of the 1860s and 70s, the game barely had positions at all. A team would win the ball, and one man would run with it, and everyone else would charge forward behind him, waiting to pounce if he lost it. Passing was seen as cowardly. The formations, if you can call them that, packed almost everyone into attack. Some sides played with 8 or 9 forwards and left a single defender to fend for himself. Football wasn't a team sport yet. It was a series of individual duels happening at the same time. Then someone asked the first real question, and it was obvious once they'd thought to ask it. What if we passed the ball to each other instead? The Scottish clubs of the 1870s figured this out, and it changed everything. Passing meant you needed players in different places to receive the ball. It meant the pitch had to be divided. Out of this came the first real formation, the 2-3-5, known as the pyramid. 2 fullbacks at the base, 3 halfbacks across the middle, 5 forwards along the top. For the first time, a team had a defined spine, and the man in the center of that midfield 3, the center half, became the most important player on the pitch. He defended, he attacked, he set the rhythm, he was the heartbeat of the team. For 40 years, the pyramid ruled. And then, in 1925, someone changed a single rule, and the whole structure collapsed. The offside law was rewritten. Before that year, an attacker needed 3 defenders between himself and the goal to stay onside. Now he only needed 2. Overnight, defenses were exposed. Forwards who had been trapped were suddenly free. Goals poured in at a rate nobody had ever seen. The old pyramid, so stable for so long, was leaking everywhere. This was a crisis, and it needed a radical answer. At Arsenal, a manager named Herbert Chapman found it. His solution was to take that all-important center half, the heartbeat of the pyramid, and pull him backward, out of midfield and into defense, to sit between the 2 fullbacks as a dedicated stopper. It sounds simple. It was heresy. Chapman had taken the most creative player on the pitch and turned him into a destroyer. The center half became the center back, and the modern defender was born. Invented purely to plug the hole the offside change had torn open. To rebalance the team, Chapman pulled 2 forwards back into midfield, and the shape that emerged looked like 2 letters stacked together, a W and an M. The WM formation. It would dominate football for the next 25 years. Every solution creates a new problem, though, and the WM had a flaw hiding inside it. It was rigid. Players held their positions like pieces on a chessboard, each locked to a zone. And across Europe, coaches began to wonder, what would happen if the pieces could move? The first to truly break the grid came from Central Europe and then from Hungary. The Hungarian national team of the 1950s, the side they called the Mighty Magyars, arrived at Wembley in 1953 to play England, who had never lost at home to a team from outside the British Isles. The Hungarians had a player named Nandor Hidegkuti wearing the number 9 shirt, the number of a center forward. But Hidegkuti didn't play up front. He dropped deep into midfield, into space where no defender wanted to follow him. England's stopper, trained by the WM to mark the center forward, faced an impossible choice. Follow Hidegkuti and leave a gap in defense, or ignore him and let him control the game. England froze. Hungary won 6-3. The deep-lying forward, the ancestor of the modern playmaker and eventually the false 9, had just been invented. And it was invented specifically to break a defender who didn't know whether to hold or chase. Hungary's lesson spread, and nowhere did it land harder than in Italy. though the Italians took it in the opposite direction. If attackers were becoming fluid and dangerous, the Italian answer was to build a fortress. They took a spare defender, freed him from any marking duty, and stationed him behind the defensive line to clean up anything that broke through. This was the libero, the free man, the sweeper. The system was called Catenaccio, the doorbolt. It was cynical, it was suffocating, and it won everything. The sweeper existed for one reason: to be the last line of insurance against exactly the kind of clever forward Hungary had unleashed. Now the game had a thesis and an answer to it. Attacking fluidity on one side, defensive lockdown on the other. What came next fused both, and it remains the most beautiful idea football has ever produced. In the Netherlands, at Ajax, and then with the national team, a philosophy took hold that erased the very concept of a fixed position. They called it total football. The premise was radical. Any outfield player could take over the role of any other. If a defender surged forward into attack, a midfielder would drop into defense to cover him. If a winger drifted inside, a fullback would push up to fill the flank. The team breathed as a single organism, constantly rotating so that the shape never stayed still long enough to be attacked. Total football didn't invent a new position. It did something stranger. It made every player capable of playing every position, which meant the pitch had no fixed map at all. It was the exact opposite of the rigid WM grid, and it was a direct descendant of that Hungarian side who first dared to let a number 9 wander. To work, total football needed a specific kind of player, and it produced one. It needed fullbacks who could attack, defenders comfortable on the ball, forwards who would track back. The rigid specialist was dying. The complete footballer was being born. And the man who understood this better than anyone was a young Dutch forward named Johan Cruyff, who would carry these ideas into the next century as a coach. The story doesn't end in the 70s. It loops. Cruyff took the Dutch philosophy to Barcelona and rebuilt the club around it, and a young coach in his shadow absorbed every lesson. That coach was Pep Guardiola. When Guardiola began his own managerial career, he took total football's fluidity and gave it a new grammar. Where the Dutch had chaos and instinct, Guardiola brought control and structure, dividing the pitch into zones and dictating exactly which player should occupy each one at each moment. He called it positional play. What made Guardiola dangerous was that he kept inventing positions to solve new problems, just as Chapman had a century before. When opponents pressed his midfield, he pulled a fullback infield to become an extra midfielder, creating the inverted fullback, a player who defends on the wing but attacks through the center. When he needed a striker who would drag defenders out of position, he revived Hungary's old trick and fielded a false 9, a center forward who drops deep and leaves the penalty box empty on purpose. Every one of these was an answer to a specific tactical problem, dreamed up in the same spirit that pulled Chapman's center half backward in 1925. That is the thread tying the whole century together. The center back exists because of an offside rule. The playmaker exists because a Hungarian dared to wander. The sweeper exists to stop him. Total football exists to erase the grid, and positional play exists to rebuild it with purpose. No position on the pitch is permanent, and none of them was inevitable. Each is a fossil of a problem that a coach somewhere refused to accept. So the next time you watch a match and hear a commentator name the positions as if they were laws of nature, remember what they really are. They're solutions. They're the surviving answers to 100 years of questions still being asked, still being rewritten. The map of the pitch was never finished. It's just waiting for the next problem and the next mind stubborn enough to solve it.